It is the divine responsibility of each generation to advance and improve the world that they were given at birth. So far, my generation, the baby boomers, has yet to fulfill this moral obligation to our Creator and heirs. Our nation and free society is experiencing a plague of lies and an epidemic of ignorance that is manufacturing nothing but unimaginable tragedy and catastrophe for the citizens of this great country. The only way out of this escalating national disaster is to find out how we got into this collapsing ruin of failed political policies in the first place. There are numerous legal illusions, bureaucratic patches, and public political posturing that our Democratic and Republican political cartels claim to have the ability and power to fix things. If you ask any politician what the answer or solution is, they will reply that if they are elected, all our problems will magically disappear and everybody will get what they want. If however, you ask that same politician, how in the hell did we get here? They will mumble platitudes and stammer excuses. Without discovering and facing the origin or epicenter of our calamities, however, none of their political pranks or partisan programs can effectively target or impact our issues and mistakes. In other words, if our elected officials and leaders cannot even tell us how we got here in the first place, how in the hell can they claim to know how to get us out of here? In simple terms, we are being tyrannized by our government and elected officials. We are lied to, spied on, and stolen from by the very institutions of government that are supposed to be of service to us and protect us from evil. Therefore, we are being tyrannized. A rational, intelligent explanation of our dilemma can be formulated. To do this, I ask that you agree with two simple concepts. The first reasonable request is that we understand that everything, and I mean everything, is connected through the fabric of creation. Secondly, we will be asked to believe that we teach by example and learn by experience. With this foundation of spiritual principles in place, we can proceed to understand and make sense of the insanity that envelops our existence today. Recognized facts, historical truths, and published documentation will be presented so that everyone can have valid data with which to be able to reason and comprehend. What will not be business as usual, however, is how these truths are logically related and interwoven to accurately reveal the cruelty and injustice of powerful institutions and men. In 1850, a French economist, Frederick Bastiat, wrote a pamphlet called The Law. He wrote this treatise to guide the French people in their transition from a monarchy to a democratic republic. In his writings, Bastiat states that the diseases, destroyers, and cancers of a free society are socialism, communism, and protectionism. See, protectionism? What's protectionism? In essence, protectionism is when political parties, politicians and governmental agencies or departments use the powers and resources of the United States government to inflict harm and steal from its citizens, all the while proclaiming that such actions are being taken to protect the populace. Protectionism infiltrates and infects free societies through a simple process: distraction and greed. Power-mongering politicians and corrupt governmental agencies simply invent or create a crisis situation. They then proclaim that they are the only ones who can protect us from this imaginary disaster. Nothing is free, of course, so rescue by these political arsonists extracts a premium price from their victims, the American public and taxpayers. Whatever the price paid in dollars, protectionism inflicts even greater damage to our morals and the nation's soul. Perhaps the most prevalent and destructive example of protectionism occurs when corrupt government agencies use the powers of the law to protect their turf in Washington and shield themselves from scrutiny or justice. The two greatest crimes in our nation's history, the public political murder of John Fitzgerald Kennedy and the terrorist attack of 9/11, were allowed to occur and be covered up by protectionism. The assassination of JFK was not the beginning nor the end of protectionism in modern times, but it is, however, the most cruel and heartbreaking example of it in our nation's history. The pathway of events that led to Kennedy's assassination starts with the CIA and Cuba. Imagine that. Before World War II, there was no intelligence agency to gather information and data about our enemies. So, the CIA was created. After a historic victory by the United States in World War II, the CIA no longer had wartime status, relevance, or budgetary priority. In an effort to stay solvent and project power, the CIA started whoring out to foreign countries and international corporations. The CIA conducted coups for foreign oil companies. Democratically elected leaders of foreign countries were murdered, and weaker countries were destabilized so that American corporations could rape them of their natural resources and products. The term Banana Republic came into use at this time to describe a country that was run by CIA proxies and plundered by American fruit corporations. Cuba, or rather the powers that felt like they owned Cuba, were clients of the CIA. Money flowed into the CIA in order to ensure that large American corporations kept control of the sugarcane production. Fulgencio Batista was the CIA-approved dictator who brutalized his people in order to keep control of the harvest. There were other illegal powers and evil forces at work in Cuba at this time also. The mafia had a monstrously profitable gambling and prostitution operation that had power and protection in the lawless, corrupt country. Cuba was the playground of the East Coast, the Las Vegas of its time. The rich, powerful, and political all came to Cuba for entertainment, gambling, and debauchery. All forms of hedonistic behavior and pleasure were available for a price, which the mafia collected. The movie Godfather depicts and exposed the presence and dynamics of the mafia in Cuba. The third power broker or participant in the lawlessness and plunder of Cuba was the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover found the island paradise fertile ground for blackmail and coercion. Senators, judges, representatives, and anyone with governmental power or authority were fair game for surveillance and entrapment. Hoover had FBI agents stationed in Cuba to take compromising photos of powerful people and celebrities. These images and evidence of drunkenness and infidelity were then weaponized to blackmail and intimidate anyone who defied or challenged J. Edgar Hoover's power. Hoover would invite the trembling, tearful, and fearful politicians into his trap or office for a nice little chat. After the images and damning evidence were shown to the now humbled big shot, Hoover would console and comfort the victim. The judge, administrator, or politician was told that Hoover and the FBI were actually on their side and that they understood how these things could happen. The trap was then closed by Hoover's promise or pledge to protect the image and reputation of the now disgraced, deflowered politician. These transactions to commit blackmail and corruption are documented by FBI files. The web of protectionism was woven and strung to protect Hoover and the FBI from any governmental oversight or judicial proceedings. The veil of secrecy, distortion, and misinformation that conceals their crimes and betrayals continues to protect the FBI to this day. After Castro defeated the Batista dictatorship, an embarrassed CIA had egg on its face and a credibility problem with its greedy clients. The mafia's losses after the revolution were in the millions, and its cash cow, it was dry. Hoover and the FBI, they no longer had a cesspool with which to trap horsefly politicians. To put it bluntly, there were some angry political traitors and powerful violent criminals who were enraged that they had lost a lucrative playground and payday. A panicked CIA reached into their bag of tricks and pulled out the coup card. By overthrowing Castro and the communists, power, prestige, and profit would once again flow into the CIA. As experienced bagmen and shadow killers, the CIA kept their hands clean by recruiting expatriate Cubans in Florida to do the dirty work and die. With the mafia and the FBI cheering them on, the CIA attempted to invade and overthrow Castro at the Bay of Pigs. The plan to retake Cuba was flawed, corrupt, and illegal. But what else would you expect from the CIA? The plot to reclaim Cuba was doomed to failure because they could not convince a skeptical President Kennedy of the necessity or worthiness of a military invasion to steal Cuba. JFK refused to engage the might of the U.S. armed forces in a shadow war. or to support the clandestine invasion with air support. Failure to accede or bend to the CIA's wishes to re-steal Cuba signed Kennedy's death warrant. After the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the CIA's Cold War began to abruptly melt because JFK and the United States would soon go toe-to-toe with Russia over the Cuban Missile Crisis. An American blockade of Cuba exposed the Russian military and Navy as being no more of a threat to the United States than painted rust. Without a Cold War to incite the fear and hatred that unlocks Congress's purse strings, the CIA would soon go broke. Vietnam became a golden opportunity for the CIA to start another hot war and get back to business as usual. Rabid anti-communism fostered by Joe McCarthy was a smoldering ember that the CIA began to fan until it became a flaming inferno of war. Once again, President Kennedy stood in the path of the CIA and blocked the rogue agency from starting a war in Vietnam for power and profit. The CIA had not taken the time to research or consider that Kennedy had visited Vietnam in 1951. He was there as a member of the House of Representatives on a fact-finding mission. He was briefed by the French military and witnessed for himself the futility and insanity of a war without boundaries or moral compass. Kennedy's fortitude and resolve to not sacrifice the United States military in a quagmire war was underestimated or ignored by the CIA. They had failed to assess the fact that Kennedy had been tempered by war and could not be intimidated with lies or threats. On October the 12th, 1963, President Kennedy authored an NSA memo, National Security Agency, that commanded the United States Armed Forces already in Vietnam to begin an initial reduction of force with the intent to eventually withdraw all combat forces from Vietnam. Once again, the CIA was being overruled or ignored by a president who knew of their treachery and evil. After writing the memo to scale down, Kennedy, however, was betrayed by a treacherous diplomat and fearful governmental administrators who had been blackmailed and compromised by Hoover and the FBI. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was publicly murdered in Dallas, Texas, 6 weeks later by the Mafia, CIA, and the FBI. Shortly after that, the federal bank vault was wide open to corrupt politicians and rogue agencies. Oh, and the dogs of war, they were unleashed. It only took LBJ 2 weeks to completely dismantle and reverse the peaceful path to progress that Kennedy had promised and was delivering to the American people. Shortly after the assassination, and before the eternal flame was even lit on Kennedy's grave, LBJ wrote his own NSA, National Security Agency, memo. LBJ directed that the United States was going to enter into and escalate a foreign civil war by bringing the full might of the United States military into the fight against communism in Vietnam. We were going to war once again. LBJ was going to protect, and there it is, that word, protect, this country and its citizens from a rural, agrarian country that had no Navy, no Air Force, and no military industrial complex. Vietnam was 20 times smaller than the United States, but it was declared to be a threat to our way of life. Protectionism emerged from hibernation as a roaring, fire-breathing creation of evil that did not stop until 50,000 young American lives were thrown onto the bonfire of greed. The only thing that LBJ protected by going all in Vietnam was his power and the cover-up of the assassination of JFK. This is the exact point in time where protectionism took root and became a strangler vine to our democracy, economy, and society. You see, there were 3 crimes committed on November 22nd, 1963. The first was the public murder of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The second crime was the theft of democracy. We did not elect LBJ to take us to war. And the third is the cover-up of the assassination of JFK. Americans have been lied to, spied on, and stolen from on an epic scale ever since. And justice will not reign over our confused, embattled country until we elect the Free Hand for Truth Party. As freedom-loving Americans, it is now time for us to grasp the sword of justice, shield ourselves with the truth, and shoulder the burden that history will bestow upon us if we fail to fight for our freedom and the future of our children.